President Trump's release from the hospital sent us searching for answers to three questions. First, how long should someone with COVID-19 quarantine? The Centers for Disease Control says 10 days from first symptoms, but neither the president nor his doctor have shared when he experienced first symptoms. We do know last Wednesday Trump cut his Duluth rally to half the typical length. By Thursday, someone at a fundraiser described the president as lethargic. That night, he tested positive for COVID. And tonight, 5 days after the rally, he removed his mask on the White House balcony and walked inside. So, is the president still contagious? U of M infectious disease specialist Beth Thielen.
Typically after onset of symptoms, it's about a week to 10 days is the longest we've been able to culture virus from a person with uncomplicated COVID. Someone's probably most infectious around the time that they're having their symptoms start, and then that tails off over time.
The president has continued to improve.
The president's doctor cited HIPAA privacy rules in not releasing more information. But does HIPAA even apply to a president? Yes. There is no exemption in HIPAA privacy rules for presidents, but any patient, including the president, can give their doctor permission to talk about their case. That said, there's a long history of presidents withholding medical information from the public, a tradition that appears to be continuing. Boyd Hubert, KARE 11 News.